Without being able to buy parts to repair this Bugatti, it seemed like an impossible rebuild. And on top of that, even if we were able to buy parts, they were just extortionate. But on the way, we wanted to stop by Molsheim, where the Bugattis are made. And of course, a trip wouldn't be a road trip without a few mishaps,
Overheated.
and police intervention.
2 years, countless unanswered questions, and one door that seemed firmly closed. Matt Armstrong had spent years chasing a challenge that Bugatti simply wasn't willing to entertain. Every attempt ended with the same answer: no. Most people would have walked away. Matt didn't. Instead, he kept rebuilding, pushing boundaries, and waiting for the moment when the impossible opportunity might finally appear.
We did the impossible. But now it's going to get a lot harder because everything from now on is building the car and fixing it.
What happened next wasn't just another car project. It became a confrontation between persistence and prestige, ambition and resistance. And behind those closed doors was a question nobody could ignore. What happens when one determined builder refuses to take no for an answer? The empty factory. Armstrong reached Molsheim, and there was nothing there. No welcome party, no confrontation, no Bugatti representative waiting to comment on the car he'd rebuilt against their explicit warnings. Just a quiet factory with no one in sight. There's a simple explanation buried in the timing. Reaching the location fell on Bastille Day, a national public holiday across France.
That's why everything was closed and nobody was there, because the 14th of July in France is the national day, so that's banking holiday.
Offices closed, staff off work. The empty factory wasn't a snub or a statement from Bugatti at all. Just an accident of scheduling that happened to land on the exact day Armstrong chose to show up. In the moment, though, an empty factory after driving hundreds of miles carries its own kind of weight, holiday or not. 2 years of blacklisted parts, public statements from the CEO, and constant online debate had led to this: a locked gate and silence. If this had been the final scene of the story, it would have read as a fitting, almost poetic ending to a relationship that started with rejection and never really improved. Except it wasn't the final scene. A few days after Armstrong's failed attempt to reach anyone at the factory, Bugatti called him. Not a legal team issuing another warning. Not a statement from Rimac addressing pricing rumors again. An actual invitation. A company representative explained that the empty factory had been a holiday coincidence, nothing more, and offered something Armstrong hadn't received once in 2 years of fighting for recognition: a proper official factory visit, scheduled for September.
So yeah, that'd be amazing if we can come down.
Yeah. No, so we need to organize. I would say in September.
Yep.
For you to visit.
The significance of that moment is easy to undersell if you don't know how this story started. This is the same company that quoted an insurance write-off price of $1.7 million, rather than offer a reasonable repair path. The same company that blacklisted vehicle identification numbers to cut off parts access entirely. The same CEO who went on Instagram to push back publicly on claims about pricing and repair practices, and who framed independent rebuilds as something close to reckless. For 2 years, every official word from Bugatti about Armstrong's projects carried a tone of dismissal, concern, or outright refusal. Then, seemingly overnight, that tone shifted. Whether it was the viral attention from the road trip video, genuine appreciation for the persistence Armstrong had shown, or simply good timing, after 2 years of mounting public pressure, something changed. The company that had spent 2 years saying no was now saying, "Come see us in September." It's worth being careful not to oversell what this invitation actually means. It isn't Bugatti reversing its position on independent repairs or officially endorsing at-home rebuilds of hypercars. It isn't a lifted blacklist on the Chiron's parts, and it isn't a public statement walking back anything Rimac said. It's a factory visit, an invitation to see the place where these cars are born, extended to someone the company had spent 2 years keeping at arm's length. That's a meaningfully smaller gesture than full reconciliation, but for a relationship built entirely on refusal up to this point, it's still the first door that's ever opened. For Armstrong, even a modest opening changes the calculation. Every previous interaction with Bugatti had been transactional or defensive. A blacklist here, a public statement there.
You can't do that in a garage. There's just a few places in the world with the right equipment and only a few people in the world with the right training to be able to do that.
A legal disclaimer wrapped around a technically polite offer to fly the Chiron to France. This was different. This was an invitation extended after the company had already had every opportunity to simply ignore him for good, especially after an uninvited visit to their own front door on a holiday when nobody was even there to see it happen. The Veyron road trip. Before any of that silence at the factory gate, there was a plan, and it started with a second Bugatti sitting in Armstrong's workshop, a Veyron, the model that first put the brand back on the map in the modern era. While the Chiron stayed tangled up in a 2-year parts blacklist and a public back and forth with Bugatti's own CEO, the Veyron quietly reached a different milestone. It became drivable. The gap between the two projects mattered. The Chiron was still far from finished, still caught in a standoff nobody had resolved. The Veyron represented forward motion, proof that Armstrong's approach could actually produce a working result, not just an ongoing controversy. And Armstrong, never one to let a milestone go quietly, decided to use that car to make a statement Bugatti couldn't simply respond to with an Instagram post. He planned a road trip. Not a short cruise around the block to test the repairs, but a genuine drive from the United Kingdom across the English Channel and deep into France, ending in Monaco. The idea had 2 layers to it. First, it was proof of concept, a way to show that a car Bugatti had written off as unfixable could handle real-world distance and real-world stress. Second, and just as important, it was a way to force a reaction. Armstrong wanted to see how the company would respond when the evidence wasn't a video or a claim, but the actual car, running, driving, and covering hundreds of miles under its own power. The trip wasn't flawless, and Armstrong didn't try to hide that. A faulty fuel control module caused problems along the way. There was an internal fuel hose issue that needed attention. A brake light switch failed at one point, and, in a detail that almost feels inevitable for a car this powerful pushed this hard, there was an overheating incident somewhere along the route. None of these were minor annoyances easily brushed off. Each one was the kind of failure that could have stranded him hundreds of miles from home.
That is bits of glue and carbon fibre, I think. A little bit of a crack, but it's cracked this splitter.
In a country where getting Bugatti parts was already the entire problem in the first place. But the Veyron kept going. It made it across the Channel, through France, and reached Monaco, completing the road trip Armstrong had set out to finish. For a car that Bugatti had effectively declared beyond saving, arriving in one of the wealthiest, most car-obsessed cities in the world, was its own kind of vindication. Here's where the plan got interesting. Molsheim, where Bugatti's headquarters and factory sit, is actually north of Monaco, not on the direct route south. Reaching the factory wasn't a convenient stop along the way. It required a deliberate detour, extra miles added specifically to put the car in front of the company that had refused to help build it. Armstrong took that detour. The location itself carries weight beyond the current dispute. Molsheim has been tied to the Bugatti name since 1909, when Ettore Bugatti founded the company there. back when the region was still part of the German Empire rather than France. It's the same ground where the brand built its earliest racing success, where tragedy struck in 1939 when Ettore's son Jean died testing a car near that very factory, and where the company eventually collapsed after Ettore's death in 1947, only to be revived decades later by new ownership. Driving a self-repaired Veyron to that specific address wasn't a random stop. It was Armstrong placing his work directly at the doorstep of the brand's entire history and legacy, uninvited, unannounced, and impossible to ignore. Whether that was a calculated move or simply the natural next step of a 2-year saga, it set up a moment nobody, including Armstrong himself, could have fully scripted. There's also a practical layer to the timing worth pointing out. Road trips across international borders in a car this rare come with their own set of risks that have nothing to do with mechanical reliability. Customs, insurance coverage while driving through multiple countries, and simply keeping a car worth millions of dollars safe overnight in unfamiliar cities, all had to be worked out before the Veyron ever left the workshop. None of that gets mentioned in a highlight reel, but it's part of why a trip like this takes real planning, rather than a spur-of-the-moment decision. Armstrong wasn't just testing the car's mechanical repairs. He was testing whether 2 years of work could survive contact with the real world outside a controlled garage environment, on roads and in countries where nothing was guaranteed. The broken Chiron. To understand how a phone call like that ever happened, the story has to rewind 2 years, back to a wrecked car nobody expected Matt Armstrong to touch. He didn't set out to start a war with one of the most exclusive car companies on Earth. He just wanted to fix a broken Bugatti. That decision turned into the longest, messiest, most watched feud in the world of high-end car restoration. And it started with a Chiron Per Sport.
The other one was a Bugatti Chiron Per Sport out in Miami.
That is so sick.
We later found that the Bugatti, it was impossible to buy parts directly from them.
That should never have made it back onto public roads, at least according to the people who built it. The car had belonged to content creator Alex Gonzalez, known online as FXAlexGYT. It got damaged during a stunt gone wrong. The kind of accident that turns a $4 million hypercar into an insurance write-off overnight. Airbags deployed. Carbon fiber cracked. The transmission took a direct hit. Bugatti looked at the damage and gave a repair estimate north of $1.7 million. A number designed less as an invoice and more as a message. Walk away. Gonzalez did walk away. The car ended up listed on Copart, an online marketplace where wrecked and salvage vehicles go to find their next owner, usually for pennies compared to what they once cost. Most buyers on that site are looking for parts or profit. Armstrong was looking for a project. He had built a career and a workshop out of buying supercars other people had given up on, and a Bugatti Chiron Per Sport, one of only 60 ever made, was the kind of car that could define a channel. He bought it. That's when things got complicated. Once Gonzalez turned down Bugatti's repair quote, the company didn't just step back and let someone else take a shot. They refused to sell official replacement parts for the car. They wouldn't support an independent rebuild in any way. Functionally, they blacklisted the vehicle identification number, cutting off the only reliable pipeline of parts a project like this would need. For most buyers, that would have been the end of it. A Bugatti without Bugatti's cooperation is a very expensive paperweight. Armstrong pushed forward anyway. The damage itself explains why Bugatti reacted the way it did. This wasn't a scratched bumper or a cracked mirror. The gearbox housing had shattered. The monocoque, the central structural shell that holds the entire car together and keeps the driver alive in a crash, had taken real structural damage. Bugatti's position was that shortcuts on a car built to handle speeds past 260 miles an hour weren't shortcuts at all. They were risks. Risks to whoever eventually sat behind the wheel, and risks to a brand that had spent decades building a reputation for engineering that doesn't fail. That's a fair point on paper. Hypercars aren't built like ordinary vehicles. Their carbon fiber structures are cured under specific pressure and temperature conditions inside a factory, not bonded back together in a home garage, no matter how skilled the person holding the tools might be. Bugatti's argument wasn't really about protecting a car. It was about protecting people, and protecting a name that customers pay millions of dollars to trust. But Armstrong wasn't some hobbyist with a wrench and a dream. He'd already built a reputation and a business around exactly this kind of impossible rebuild. Other cars had gone through his shop and come out running, driving, performing the way they were supposed to. He had a growing audience, watching every step, which meant every setback, every small win, and every rejection from Bugatti was public from the very beginning. There was no quiet way to fail this project, and there was no quiet way to succeed either. So the standoff began. On one side, a manufacturer protecting decades of engineering credibility and legal exposure. On the other, a mechanic with cameras rolling, a growing fan base, and a car sitting in pieces that the company that built it wanted nothing to do with. Neither side was going to back down easily, and neither side really understood yet how long this was going to drag on, or how public it was about to become. What made the situation harder to untangle is that both sides technically had a point, and neither point canceled the other out. Bugatti wasn't wrong that a Chiron Pur Sport is not a car you learn to repair through trial and error. These are hand-built machines, produced in numbers so small that 60 units represents the entire run of that specific version. Every part is engineered to work within a system, not as a standalone piece you can swap in from a parts bin. Armstrong wasn't wrong either, that once a car is sold, ownership should come with the right to decide what happens to it next, even if the manufacturer disagrees with that decision. Rimac speaks out. Mate Rimac doesn't usually respond to online drama about parts pricing. He runs Bugatti and Rimac.
German carmaker Volkswagen is in talks to sell its supercar brand Bugatti to Croatian entrepreneur Mate Rimac,
two of the most technically demanding car companies in the world. And he has bigger problems most days than a YouTube comment section. But Armstrong's Chiron project had grown too loud to ignore, and eventually, Rimac addressed it directly. The trigger was an SOS. Armstrong, deep into the rebuild and blacklisted from official parts, had discovered two significant tears in the transmission mounts, a serious structural problem on a car pushing this kind of power. He put out a public plea for support, hoping Bugatti or someone connected to the company might step in. Instead, he got a response from the very top. Rimac posted a video to Instagram addressing the situation head-on. His message was carefully worded, but pointed. There's been a lot of talk online about Bugatti's service, repair, and maintenance costs, he said, and most of what people are hearing simply isn't true. He acknowledged that owning a Bugatti isn't cheap. Nobody was arguing otherwise, but he pushed back hard on the specific numbers that had been circulating Armstrong's project, calling much of it inaccurate. This is where the story stopped being a mechanic quietly working on a car and turned into a genuine standoff between a creator and a CEO. Rimac didn't stop at defending pricing. He explained that the only place equipped to properly repair a car this complex was the Molsheim factory itself. In his view, the intricate components that make a Bugatti simply couldn't be replicated or repaired anywhere else. Certainly not through methods like 3D printing parts at home, something that had been floated as a workaround. There was a small opening in his message, though. Rimac said the car was welcome at the Molsheim facility if Armstrong wanted to fly it over for factory attention. On the surface, that sounds like an olive branch. In practice, it was closer to a challenge. An offer built on terms that assumed Armstrong would eventually admit defeat and hand the project over entirely. He didn't take it, at least not right away. Armstrong responded in a new upload, making clear he wasn't giving up on rebuilding the Chiron himself. He wasn't dismissing Rimac's concerns outright either. He'd found real structural damage. He knew this wasn't a simple fix, but he also wasn't willing to abandon a project he'd already sunk enormous time, money, and public trust into, especially not after building an entire audience around watching him solve problems other people said couldn't be solved. What made this saga different from a typical online dispute is how long it kept resurfacing. Viewers started bringing up Armstrong's situation on completely unrelated videos, whether the topic was a factory tour, a totally different Bugatti rebuild, or general supercar news. The story had outgrown its original lane. It became a reference point, a shorthand people used whenever the conversation turned to manufacturers, independent mechanics, and who gets to decide what happens to a car once it's sold. If Bugatti truly didn't want outside repairs happening on their cars, the argument went, they should buy back damaged vehicles directly from insurance before they ever reach an auction site like Copart. Once a car is sold to a private owner, that reasoning suggests the manufacturer's control should end there. Others weren't so sure. Some commenters pointed out the brand risk Armstrong represented, regardless of his intentions. A crash involving a car he'd personally rebuilt, even years down the line, and even if the failure had nothing to do with his work, could become a headline that damaged Bugatti's reputation.
First ever crash damaged car and attempted to rebuild it.
Far more than any parts blacklist ever could. Good intentions, as one commenter put it, don't change how the world actually works when a $4 million hypercar is involved. What comes next for Armstrong? 2 years of conflict don't disappear because of one phone call, and nobody watching this story closely expects them to. The Chiron Pour Sport rebuild is still, as far as the public record shows, an ongoing project, still shaped by the parts access and safety concerns Rimac raised from the very beginning. A September factory visit for the Veyron doesn't automatically unlock official support for the other car sitting in Armstrong's workshop. But momentum matters, especially in a story that's been watched this closely for this long. Armstrong built his entire audience around the idea that broken, written-off supercars deserve a second chance, even when the manufacturer disagrees. Bugatti built its response around protecting the integrity, safety, and reputation of some of the most expensive cars on the planet. Neither side has fully backed down from that core position, and neither should be expected to. What's changed is the tone. A company that spent 2 years treating Armstrong's work as an unofficial project outside its control appears, for the first time, willing to engage directly rather than issue statements through social media or legal disclaimers wrapped in politeness. That's a meaningful shift, even if it's a cautious one, and even if it applies to one car rather than both. There's also the matter of what this means for how manufacturers handle situations like this going forward. Armstrong isn't the only creator buying wrecked exotic cars and rebuilding them in public. The entire genre exists because audiences are drawn to watching someone succeed where a company says it's impossible. How Bugatti chooses to handle its most public example of this could shape how other manufacturers respond the next time it happens to them, whether that means tighter blacklisting policies or, potentially, more structured paths for independent rebuilds under some form of manufacturer oversight. For now, the September visit stands as the clearest marker of progress in a relationship that started with a locked gate and a legal warning. Whether it turns into genuine collaboration, a one-time gesture, or something in between, depends on what happens once Armstrong actually walks through Bugatti's doors. This time by invitation, rather than by driving 900 miles and hoping someone might be home. The Chiron Pure Sport, blacklist and all, is still waiting for its own turning point.
This is a Bugatti Chiron Pure Sport, and it is the ultimate version of one of the ultimate cars.
If the Veyron trip is any indication, that turning point might not come the way anyone expects. It might come quietly, days after the cameras stop rolling, in the form of a phone call nobody saw coming. There's a broader lesson here too, one that goes beyond a single feud between a mechanic and a manufacturer. Persistence, documented publicly and consistently over years rather than weeks, has a way of shifting outcomes that pure argument never manages to. Armstrong didn't win Bugatti over with a press release or a legal challenge. He won a small opening by simply continuing to show up, car after car, mile after mile, long after most people would have quietly walked away from a fight this one-sided. That approach doesn't guarantee a happy ending, and it hasn't produced one yet for the Chiron. But it's produced something rarer than victory in a story like this. A company that once refused to engage at all, now willing to open a door, even if just a crack, and see who's standing on the other side. 2 years of rejection ended with a phone call nobody saw coming. Matt Armstrong didn't get an apology, and he didn't get his blacklist lifted. What he got was an invitation, extended by the same company that once called his work impossible. That's not a full reconciliation, but after 2 years of silence and legal disclaimers, it's the closest thing to recognition this story has produced. Whether Bugatti's September visit turns into real change or stays a one-time gesture is still an open question, and it's one worth watching closely. If you think this invitation means something bigger is coming, drop your take in the comments. Hit like if you've been following this saga from the start, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens when Armstrong finally walks through that door.